Well, welcome. I appreciate you taking some time today. I wasn't sure how many people would actually join today due to the weekend coming up, but I think this is something I'm trying to keep going because I think this is really important for us to think about all these various pieces of managing. Today, we're going to talk about emergency plans. And let me first start off with, what I view an emergency plan is needed for. Obviously, it's for anything that shuts down your business, but I want to go a little beyond that. Look at it like something that could disrupt your business to the extent of 20% or more of sales or cash flow. Because all of a sudden, if something could immediately changes your business by that large of a percentage, you have a problem. Or most businesses would have a problem. There may be a few exceptions, but and so I want to just, like I said, expand it just a little to cover that, because I think it's critical we think about some of these other things that are emergencies that aren't necessarily labeled as such. So why do we need one? And the answer is really, we have these threats, and the threats come from external, and they sometimes come from internal, and it could be from failure to exercise proper precautions when we're doing our basic operations, and it can be external, like COVID-19. The COVID-19 is just a really good example of why we need to be thinking about some of this stuff. We can't necessarily plan for everything, but we can plan. And it gives us a starting point, and it helps us with interim goals, because we can't cover COVID-19 as far as shutting down the business. And there is some insurance for it, but it's minimal. There's not too many people that have that, but we can do some other things, and we can try to make sure that we're not as isolated. We're seeing things with COVID-19 as far as affecting supply chains. And so that's something that the bigger businesses are going to definitely relook at, because right now they may have too much tied into China. And it's true for some of the people on this call. So we just have to look at all of these different pieces. The other part about planning is it just gives us a running start at something. We cannot plan for everything. And I don't remember which general said this, but a military plan doesn't survive the first shot of the war. And the point is, once things start happening, then the plan is not going to be totally functional, and it's going to change. But it gives us a running start. It gives us some things that we need to do, and we're going to have some pieces in place that are going to help us. So really, what does it consist of? And I'm sort of walking through this handout that all of you should have gotten. There's two handouts. One is the outline of what I'm talking about today, and then the other is a business emergency plan. And we're going to get into some details on that here in a minute. But what does an emergency plan consist of? Well, first I have to identify the areas of weakness, and then we have to define, for small businesses, I think we have to look at it whether or not it's something for us or for somebody else. And where this becomes important is so many small businesses are dependent on the owner or maybe on a key manager. And so if something happens to them, so for instance, COVID-19 gets the owner, and whether they die or just say they're in the hospital for 2 months, but they're out of the picture, can the business keep running? And that's the part that there's one set of plans for that. But then the other set, and this is where more normal things, we have a fire, we have computer issues, we have, the COVID-19 as far as shutting down the business. Then those set of problems, those we can really just outline, and we have we need more detail if it's for somebody else. But if we know what we're thinking, just thinking about it in advance, jotting down our ideas. I like these mind maps. They just help me think things through. What are the ideas that are related to it? And then get that in place. Um, so what are our basic steps? And I'm going to show you the screen um, for my outline. And basically, we identify those areas of weakness. Okay, and then we go through and we say, okay, what can we prevent? And that's something that there are some things that you actually can prevent. You can't prevent COVID-19, but we can prevent. Uh, we can be prepared for it. And there's some things that we can prevent as far as maybe fire or things like that, because we can reduce that risk by proper procedures. Okay. Then we identify the areas that we can mitigate damages. So these are the things that, like I say, computer cyber theft. Okay, it's a real problem. We've had several clients that have had, somebody hacked into their system and locked it up, and it's becoming, the antivirus stuff is improving, but how can we mitigate those damages? One, proper backups. Two, making sure antivirus is working right. These are the things we can start thinking about and really testing to make sure that we reduce the risk. We're still going to be at risk. And actually, it's more risk right now because so many people are working virtually. Zoom has had its issues. And so the virtual part creates some problems. And then we identify areas that we can protect through insurance. So, and this may be a combination of things. We may want to prevent stuff and mitigate damages and have insurance. So obviously we want to do best practices for reducing fire risk, but we're also going to carry fire insurance. So that's the type of thing that we really want to look at is what do we want to do with these things? And then once we start thinking through it, then we develop our plans. And like I said, some plans are going to be very extensive. Others are going to be, okay, here's there 2 or 3 things we can do. Just know we have to do them and we're fine. Maybe there's a few things we have to have in place. Most of us are going to carry more hand sanitizer going forward. Things like that. Just some simple things, but we're going to be prepared for it. So let's walk through an example of a business emergency plan. And this is and can everybody see my business emergency plan here? Let's see, here it is. There it is. And you should have a copy of this. So mine's this is a little hard to read because of it's so small. But basically, at the bottom part is where I went through, what happens if something happens to the owner? Then we have to plan for somebody else to take over. Then we got business continuation and transition issues. And these are just different thoughts that I had as far as different areas we have to address. And each one of those then requires, okay, what are we going to do with this? So this is not a complete plan, but this is a outline of how we approach the plan. So we have to figure out who's going to pay the bills and those type of things. And again, just talking this through in advance is really important. But up above where owner is fine, then it's like, okay, this plan, you're going to be there to be part of the implementation. So then it's a matter of, let's just lay this out. What are the areas that we can that we really need to address. So we have our business environment. Now, this is where most people think about emergencies. And this is, all the big stuff: natural disasters, terrorism, COVID-19, recession. You could have a specific industry meltdown that could be a problem. Obsolescence, your product might be obsolete. You're selling something. So for instance, CPA firm, all of a sudden, the IRS comes out, or Congress comes out with regulations, and the IRS is going to do all the taxes. And we're not there to do any of that. I personally be okay with it, but the point is, big chunks of revenue are all of a sudden gone. And it ties into the regulation. All of a sudden, regulation could change your industry significantly. So these are the things, these are the big ones that we have to start thinking about. But then we get into some of the other ones that could create just as much disruption. What is in marketing and sales, you could have a business that has 20 to 40% of your business tied up with one customer. This happens a lot in small business. That is huge. I had clients that have sold to major corporations, and they end up with too high of percentage selling to one corporation, and then they lose it. Defection of a key employee, say yes, sales manager, and he goes to a competitor. That is a problem. And that's something we have to deal with. Supply chains. All of a sudden, you have a problem with the supply chain. So each of these areas has different problems, marketing, sales, human resources. You get a Me Too type litigation. Those are problems, and it could create a huge issue for a client or for a business at the wrong time. Right now we're having a few clients that are having trouble hiring people because people are making too much money on unemployment. And again, you can't produce. So these are all the types of things you can think about, but this is just a starting point. Each of your businesses is different. This is where you each need to think about these things. And this just gives you some rough general categories. You can add however many other ones you want, but think about, is there anything in operations that can shut you down for 20% or more of your business? You get an OSHA complaint. Technology, obviously, cyber issues or data storage failures. People think they have backups, they don't. Finances, there's all sorts of issues there. Theft. These are all different pieces. And if you do nothing else out of today, maybe you just go down this list and say, okay, what am I going to do with this? And that's a start of a plan. And, you don't have to have this perfect. You just have to do it. Start getting it there. And that's the point with this, is you're not going to ever achieve perfection. But what you can do is get something in place that will help you going forward. So where are we going to go with this? Well, there's a couple things I want to point out. And these are some special notes here that, use your advisors, lean into them. Insurance agents can sometimes tend to be lazy and not look at your risk. If you haven't had an insurance agent come out to your place in 10 years, have them come out, get their advice. Same with your banker. Obviously, me as a CPA is an important part. If you don't have an external board of directors or advisors, it doesn't have to be a legal board, but get other people to advise you that you want to bounce ideas off of. This is how you start thinking through some of these bigger picture things. But use your advisors as much as you can. Look for trends. And I just was starting to read a book on somebody that identified mega trends. And it's kind of an interesting thought process. Look for things in your industry. And also look for things out of your industry, because that's where you can start seeing some things that might impact your industry. Leverage. This is, again, some of these things we can't prevent, but we can be in better financial position And that's where keeping our leverage to a manageable level. We can weather some storms just by having our leverage lower. And then obviously developing your team that reduces the risk in a lot of different areas. Plus you have your team identifying areas that they can work on. And they identify areas where there's potential risk. And that's the type of thing that you start thinking about. So our key takeaways here is, learn from our mistakes. What did we learn from the COVID-19 things? What are we going to do different? And what can we put in place? This really will help us run better businesses, because you start looking at some of these things, if you put in place better practices, you're going to be maybe a safer environment. You're going to run better service. You're going to keep your employees because you're going to be more focused on them. That you eliminate a lot of these risks, and that helps us run a better business. And then the other big thing here is communicate this. Make sure you're not doing this and then put it under a rock, in your backyard. Obviously, you need to communicate this with your team, and your spouse, and, with key advisors, just to get their input too. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. I hope this has been beneficial. Now I just take any questions anybody has. And if you can either throw them in the chat box, or you can shoot me an email, and I will try to address whatever we can. So let's see. Does anybody have any questions? And I know this is a little smaller group today, but let's see. Okay, one of the, let's see here. Okay. Any particular areas you would look at for business insurance risk? I think the business insurance risk, again, really all areas need to be looked at. I think, there's some newer insurance policies out there. Like, for instance, I just renewed my cyber insurance. So, that's just something that I took out starting a couple of years ago, I guess. And that's an area. But, you have earthquake. That's something that, again, getting the right advisors. I had a few years ago, we were looking at this with some clients, and they were real happy with their insurance agent, but their insurance agent was out of Texas. And so as a result, they didn't have earthquake here in Missouri, which is relatively cheap. And if there's a problem, all of a sudden their house goes down, and they're still on the hook for $400,000 to the bank. These are the types of things where, again, getting those advisors and using them, leaning into them. So, and then again, insurance agents, sometimes, again, the good ones that, especially ones that get into the commercial risk, they will walk through your business. If you have a manufacturing plant, they'll help you, what are those risks? And they'll tell you what those are. Then everybody's got human resource issues, or potentially. So, we just have to keep going through all those things. Let's see, what else? Here's another question. Where do we start with all this? And, to me, a lot of where we start is trying to identify our areas of weakness, and that involves brainstorming with both our team and with some of the advisors. If you could get your banker, insurance agent, CPA, and maybe another friend or a key employee or two together and talk about it. That, again, start to identify what are the risks in your business. That's just starting to do that really helps. So that's just something that you just got to keep trying things. Here's another one. How do you prepare financially for something like COVID-19? You can't completely prepare financially for something like COVID-19, but what you can do is run better businesses. And so and it sounds too simple, but the more we run the businesses right, we keep our leverage at a reasonable level. We don't take all the profits out of the business, even though that may be contrary to what some people think, but or you take them out, but you set it aside. The point is you set aside reserves for the future. And when you can do that, then when COVID-19 hits, and we're going to have a second round in COVID-19, or everybody's saying, so we have to be prepared for it. They may not shut down, but if people don't go back to shopping malls and restaurants and stuff, it's going to impact our society. So we just have to manage businesses not on the edge, but we have to get cushion. We need margin in our lives. We need it personally. We need it business wise. So all of a sudden, too many business owners, all of a sudden they make that first 100,000 or 200,000, and they're doing well. Then they go out and buy a bigger house. All you've done is increase leverage. And that's where it gets in trouble. So leverage is a real big thing here. It can be very useful, but you got to be careful. Okay, seems like you never really finish a disaster plan since things constantly change. How often should you review it? Yeah, no, that's a great point. This ties back to, and we talked a little bit about this a couple calls ago, on management and having a management plan and having a checklist. Something like the basic disaster plan, you should develop it, for each of the main areas that you feel are at risk. And then at least once a year, review it. Now, I think beyond that, every quarter or at least twice a year, you should say, okay, are there any other new risks? This gets into this, and this ties into SWOT analysis too. Where do we have threats? And so this is something that, if you're looking at this quarterly or semi-annually, it's like, okay, this is another possible problem that we just discovered. We didn't realize that this one machine was doing something that was creating some potential risk, or we just all of a sudden realized that our supply chain is about to go away. Things like that. So we always have to be aware of this, and it is a constantly evolving thing. But a complete review, once a year, but some mini reviews quarterly or semi-annual would be great. Any other questions here today? Let's see. Here's a pretty simple one, but just how does this really help us? Because we may not get hit with another emergency like this, and that's the other part. But I think just by thinking these things through, we can be proactively managing our business, and we start identifying where we're dependent. And even if you don't have to do anything about it, you by consciously saying we're dependent on this particular thing, that helps us so that if all of a sudden some unknown factor comes in and makes that at risk, we know it right away, and we will react to it. So I think that's the big plus on these emergency plans, is just really identifying what are your critical areas in your business, and then going from there. So anyway, I think looks like that's pretty much it on the questions. Let's see. Yep, I think so. So if anybody else has any questions later, please let me know, email me or whatever. I will put a copy of this recording out, and we only have about 1 week's recording out on the email through Zoom. I'm really close to getting all this stuff up on YouTube, so hopefully I'll have that in the next couple days, and then we'll have the back recordings too, in case anybody needs to see something. So Anyway, thanks again. I really appreciate you participating. If you have any suggestions going forward, please let me know. I think it's good for us to really think through, and I'm happy to help all of you really think through the idea of managing this business in a much more proactive way. Have a great weekend and be safe. Thanks again.